great to see so many attendees from all over the place here in the US and in Canada. All right, well, I know we'll have people continue to join us as we roll past the top of the hour, so I'm going to get us underway. Many of you are repeat customers, but for those of you that are here for your first webinar with Unique Venues, go through a few details. You will all remain on mute throughout the webinar. That way we make sure there's no distractions for what's going on, which means that if you have questions about the presentation, please use the Q&A dialog box. There's a button on your Zoom dashboard called Q&A. Hit that. You can type in a question to be answered, either live by Dr. Seemiller, or if it's something that we can handle, we'll type out an answer to it. And other participants that see those questions, they can upvote or downvote them, so we can prioritize questions if we have so many that we want to make sure we get through the most important ones. We will be asking a couple of polls again today like we normally do. You'll see those pop up from time to time. Again, today there will be one specifically for venues and one specifically for planners. So you'll see those go after our entry demographics and before our final session evaluation. Finally, if you've got other questions or comments to share with the group, please use the chat box as people are doing now. Just make sure you look next to the to box with that drop down and change it to say all panelists and attendees so that everyone gets the benefit of that. And with that, I'm going to go ahead and stop my share here, and we're going to get underway. So I'd like to go ahead and start off by introducing Dr. Corey Seemiller. And we're going to take you off mute here so that we make sure we got there we go. Oh, I think you and I keep hitting it at the same, there we go, we're good. So Corey, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself, your background, and why you were interested in doing research and really coming to understand Generation Z.
Well, great. Well, thanks for having me, and thanks for all you tuning in today. I know that there's a lot of great information out there, and this is one of many that you could be tuning into. So thanks for spending your time with me. So my background is really in higher education. I've spent many, many years working in administrative positions in higher education where I did a lot of event planning, which is not really kind of a unique thing for me. My family is in event planning, which is pretty cool. My stepfather owned his own event planning business. Actually, it was a destination management company, and my mother worked in event planning for 20 years and worked for him. So I ended up doing a lot of events with them, event planning, event staffing, and so forth. So I'm pretty, familiar in some sense with events and event planning. I even taught a course on event planning at the University of Arizona. So it's really fun to be around, with some folks that are doing some similar work and being able to kind of think about how I translate my understanding of Generation Z to the kind of the everyday world that you all are living in and some of the things that you're thinking about in terms of events. So my background in terms of getting interested really in Generation Z comes from just my own interest in being a better higher education practitioner. I was working at the University of Arizona when I noticed that a different kind of a student was coming in. I had been there for about a decade, and I thought, well, I've sort of seen it all. We're sort of used to it, the same people. And I had one summer at orientation where there was it felt different. The students were acting really differently. And, while I look back and I can probably attribute some of that to generational shift, I don't know for sure that it was all of that, but it was enough for me to say something's going on. So really what I did is I ended up just getting online and looking up all sorts of information about Generation Z, try to figure out who they were. And at the time I was interested, they hadn't technically by age come to college yet. They were actually going to be coming to college. And I thought, you know what, I want to get out on the front end of this. I think as a Gen Xer myself, I don't think that I transitioned very well to understanding millennials. By the time I understood millennials, they weren't even the group of people I was even serving anymore. So at this point I thought, I'm going to get out in front of this. And I worked with my staff and we tried to, learn as much as we could about them. And then eventually went on with one of my staff members, and she and I did a study about Generation Z, and it just got a lot of traction. People were like, what did you find out? What did you learn? Nobody's studying this. No, what do you, all this information about Gen Z, they just wanted me to give it to them. And so I thought, okay, great. So my staff member and she and I ended up writing a book. And then, from that point on, we became so curious about this generation. We've now done 3 major studies. We've written 4 books and a number of articles on this generation in every context. I talk to everybody from like you all event planning to people who, recruit for law schools to people who, work in architecture. So it's such a neat topic that has a lot of relevance. And so really my interest was in just understanding people better. And I think that's really the heart of why it is that I continue to do what I do.
That's awesome. And so I'd say, definitely your background makes you an expert in this area. And I've known you for quite some time and have always appreciated your insights on this generation. I even have a couple of your books on my shelves. So we were talking a little bit before this started today. Could you just help us understand a little bit, who is Generation Z? Like, when were they born? What are the specific dates? Because there's often confusion about who's in and who's out. And what are some of the general characteristics that they exhibit?
Yeah, well, it's still debatable. There's not one agreed upon time frame for their birth range. Earlier Gen Z researchers used 1995 through 2010. Later Gen Z researchers used 1997 through 2012. But you're pretty safe to say that a good number of those years cross over between both of those age groups. So you're really looking at just young people today. If you were to think of it from 95 to 2010, you're looking at folks, little kids who were in 4th grade, all the way to people who are turning, 25 this year. So it really does span almost all of our youth and young adult population. So what we've done in our studies is we've broken it down into 2 groups called the little Z's and the big Z's. And the little Z's are like the elementary school, middle school, some high school. And then the big Z's are, later high school, college, and post-college, because they're really in different sort of miniature stages of their lives. So right now we've been looking at mostly the big Z's, but the little Z's are actually growing into adulthood. They're going to be turning 18 in the next couple of years here. So we're going to have to pay attention to who they are. Some of the characteristics that have been marked, especially by big Z's, is you see a generation that identifies themselves as incredibly open-minded. Even when you look at folks that might have various political affiliations, religious convictions, different ideals, a very good standard bar is that almost all of them are incredibly open-minded about certain things. Not every one of them, but a lot of them. They're very passionate about inclusion. They say they're the most racially diverse generation in US history. They're likely to either have some type of identity themselves that is a targeted or unaccepted identity in our society, or they're likely to have friends or family that are. So there's a lot of advocacy, even if it's just personal advocacy, on making sure that we're inclusive. Another big thing that we notice about this generation is that a lot of them are being raised by Gen X parents. Not all, but a good majority of them. And if anybody relates to being a Gen Xer or knows anything about Generation X, you know that Gen Xers were, growing up pretty independent, pragmatic, realistic. They kind of did their own thing, and they're in the workforce, and they often just want to give me a project and leave me alone, don't micromanage me. And so a lot of them are stepping back with their kids and not micromanaging them in the way that maybe we've been used to seeing some parents do. So we're seeing a little bit more autonomy with this generation in terms of what they're allowed to do. And so they have a little bit of an independent streak to them. Situated though in a culture in which there's a lot of judgment and social media, where people want that acceptance. So it's kind of an interesting paradox where they want to be independent and express themselves, but they don't want to be judged for that. So it's we see these kind of competing elements. But a few other things to know about them: they're pretty high levels of anxiety and depression across this generation. Not all, but again, it's something that we need to be mindful of. They're also less risky. That means financially, that means with work, that means with just everyday interactions. They take less risks. They're also incredibly tech savvy, as we know, as a whole, pretty tech savvy. Most of them are, were born swiping things. And even when you look at some of the lowest socioeconomic status, these kids are still having access to computers, tablets, and phones in some way through friends, family, or school. So again, really kind of digitally connected. So lots more we can talk about with them, but I think those are some characteristics that I think really make them in some ways unique, in some ways a little bit connected to where we saw millennials when they were their age.
Right. So you talked a little bit about kind of the technology generation, right? I mean, they came out and they were instantly swiping phones and iPads and everything else out there. So talk a little bit then, and I think sometimes we all have this perception of all of them buried in their phones or buried in their, I watch my kids sometimes, you're kind of on the cusp of the millennial and the Gen Z generation and the way they interact. Talk a little bit about how the Gen Zers like to communicate. How do they communicate with one another, and how do they kind of connect and communicate with the world around them?
Yeah, well, it's such a good question, because how they like to communicate and how they communicate are actually 2 totally different answers. And that creates some tension for them, because we found in our studies, other studies have found this as well, that the preferred method of communication with this generation is actually face-to-face. You can actually track that even to looking at, I know in a college setting where we're seeing faculty members who are having more walk-in office hours than ever before. So this is this kind of an unusual thing, but what's happening too is that how they do communicate is often through text or messaging or social media. And that's a comfort. That's a space in which, you know, feels safe in some ways to be there and not worry about how they're kind of presenting themselves. The issue that has come up though is when you prefer to do something, but you don't do it very often, you don't get a lot of practice in it. And there was a great study by Pew that actually said that high school students, recent high school students, have actually less hours per week interaction face-to-face with their friends than high school students did even 10 years ago. So you think about how much practice they're actually getting. So, you know, I keep hearing stories of, yes, I'm getting a lot of students showing up at my office hours, but they're standing in the doorway and they don't know what to say. So they want it, but they don't know how to do it. And they're even doing it. It was interesting. There's a college that I was speaking at that was telling me that in their theater department, they've been trying to cast students in theater roles, and they were having such a difficult time acting in romantic scenes because they didn't know how to do the flirtatious banter. And you know that flirting isn't always just romantic. Flirting is the ability to just kind of play off of each other. And it was so robotic, they didn't know what to do. They're actually instituting curriculum to help the students be able to interpersonally interact in a way that feels more natural. So we're seeing what they want to do and seeing what they are, you know, feel that they're good at or demonstrating they're good at are really different. So that's kind of an interesting thing to kind of consider. But as far as other types of communication, they, you know, like I said, they prefer things around texting, quick messaging. They want that exchange. A lot of them say, I do not like the telephone. Some of them haven't even set up their voicemails. And the reason that they don't like their phone, talking on the phone, other than to maybe their parents, is because they're worried that they're going to get trapped on the phone talking and having to sit and like console somebody for something that they just want to get off the phone. They don't want to hear about the breakup. They don't want to have to be trapped on the phone. And with messaging, you can control when you respond. So not really answering the phone. They're not an email generation by any stretch. They only answer email, they said, from two people, their teachers and their supervisors, and that's it. That's all. So it's kind of interesting as we think about how they like to communicate, and they want it authentic, transparent, quick, to the point, and that's why messaging seems to work really well with them.
It's so funny that you say that, because yesterday I had sent my daughter an email. I had forwarded her something that I thought was fun and interesting. And she, you know, she's home right now from college, obviously, with everything going on and working remotely from here. And she's back in her bedroom, and she came out like 2.5 hours later. And I'm like, did you see the email I sent you? Because for me, if an email comes in, I've seen it in like, 20 seconds. She's like, you sent me an email? So it's interesting to see that really I just should have Snapchatted her or something like that to get her attention, because she really does kind of live in that world of instant texting, short message. And you're right, on her time when she wants to do it. It's fascinating.
Right. And you know what I found is a shortcut to that is send the email and then send a text or a Snapchat or an Instagram or something that says, check your email. That's so classic. I love it.
Yep. So talk a little bit now about maybe what motivates this generation. What are the core issues, or what are the things that they're passionate about and that really drive them to have focus and to pursue interests and careers and hobbies and things like that in life?
Mm-hmm. Well, you know, when we think about motivation, a lot of times people kind of cluster it into this idea that we're motivated all by the same types of things. And if you actually go back a couple generations, and I'll go back to Gen X, thinking about, for instance, the workplace, how Gen X is motivated. Gen X is motivated by autonomy. You know, I feel much more passionate about doing something if you just leave me alone and let me do it my way, and then I will tell you when I'm done with it. Millennials, that did not work for them at all. They wanted a lot of, intervention. They wanted constant follow-up, and then they wanted to know that they were doing the right thing, because for them, they didn't want to waste their time doing something incorrectly and then have to go back and do it over again. So getting that constant feedback, but to a Gen Xer, that would be way too much. But then you switch over to a Gen Zer, and Gen Z is not necessarily motivated by the task at all. They're motivated by the relationships behind the people who are giving them the tasks. If I trust you, if I respect you, and if I care about you, I'm going to be motivated to do well by you. Again, this is, we have a lot of research to back this up, but I find that the stories tend to bring it more to life. I've had in the last probably 3 or 4 years, more students. I'm now a professor, and I have students who write me emails because I tell them that's the only way they can get a hold of me. I won't Snapchat with them. But so they'll write me an email and they'll say, I just wanted to let you know that I didn't turn my assignment in. And I'm like, okay, here it comes. They're going to be asking me for an extension, or can they get credit anyways? And a lot of times they don't. They actually go on to say, I don't want you to think I'm a bad student. I don't want to have let you down. And I just want you to know that I'll do better next time. I'm like, who's telling you need to write this? This is pretty nice. I like these. But I'd never gotten them before. And now I'm getting probably 5 or 6 a semester from my classes. And again, as we talk about generational, characteristics, we're looking at the peer personality. We're not looking at behavior of every single person who falls in this age group. So you're going to have people that don't act like this. But to find that there are people that are doing this is really interesting. But this idea is I'm motivated by what you think of me. So as a supervisor, I'm motivated by making sure that I don't let you down, that I am somehow going to make a difference, that what I'm doing is important. And so the validation that they need is not necessarily, am I doing the task correctly? Although that's important. It's does my task matter? And do you think that I matter? And that's a really big difference, especially because we're used to motivating people by accolades, good job, or, here's a Starbucks gift card. Yeah, those things are nice, but that is not what the heart and soul of Gen Z is. They are motivated by these relationships of the people that they care about.
That's interesting to think about, kind of the dynamics that we're all used to, what works for our generation or what we've been used to, how it continually shifts and evolves as a new wave of individuals comes through and has their own individual motivations and priorities and things like that. Which leads me to another question then about thinking about, so how do we work with Gen Zers, right? And we're at a point in time where we have 5 generations now, right? Boomers, Xers, Yers, Millennials, and Zers, all in the workforce now. And obviously they all have different motivations. So as we're navigating through this next group, and they're really, like you said, kind of reaching that 18, 19, 20-year-old phase and entering the professional workforce, how do we work with them? How do we recruit them, and how do we create an environment where they gain satisfaction from their workplace?
Yeah, this is a really important question because we think of it in 2 parts, right? This idea of recruiting and retaining. You got to get them through the door to retain them. So when we think about recruitment, how are we getting these young people to say, I want that job, I want that career? A few things to know about Gen Z. When they talk about types of jobs and thus careers that they're interested in, there's certain things that come to mind for them over others. Fulfillment, passion, happiness. They want to know that they're going to go to work every day and feel good about what they're doing, feel good about who they're working for, and feel like what they're doing makes a difference. This is a really critical piece. It's not, of course the money matters for a pretty financially conservative and money conscious generation. Yeah, they want to be paid a fair wage. They want to be paid a living wage, but it isn't about more money. They don't want to do something that makes them unhappy, even if you paid them twice what you're offering. They want to know that they're being fulfilled. I had a really a great example shared with me about this is, for instance, like a UPS driver. You could say, oh, we got all these great benefits and be a UPS driver. This is what you get. But to a Gen Zer, what you might want to say is, you know what, if you're a UPS driver, you are going to be making a difference in the lives of people. Think about all the food that you're delivering to people who wouldn't be able to get it otherwise, the medicines that you're going to be able to get to people. You are literally saving lives by being a UPS driver. That is what resonates with Gen Z. It is, yeah, they want to know that they might have a retirement benefits and they want to have healthcare. Those are the pragmatic pieces, but it's the heart. With Gen Z, we go back to the heart. They're really the we generation. So everything we do around motivating, communicating, you're starting to see these themes here. The jobs that they like has to go back to how they feel about what they're doing, and if it's in alignment with their values and they feel like what they're contributing is important. So this is one of the most important things with recruitment. When you're thinking about the messaging, the value, the ROI that you're putting out there to recruit people, how are they going to make a difference? The other thing that's in, that this group actually expressed interest in even before we were in this pandemic time was really recession-proof jobs. They wanted to know that the job was going to have some sense of stability in it and that they could choose to leave rather than having the job kind of become obsolete. So are there opportunities for recession-proof jobs? Is it flexible? Is it adaptable? Remember, their parents are Gen Xers who have become sort of the masters of work-life balance. They are expecting a very similar work environment where they can kind of come in and out as they need to, but also have access 24/7. So how are you messaging the flexibility of this? Are you looking for short-term employees who are going to staff an event that you say, do you say you have to work 6 events a month in order to stay employed, or do you give them some flexibility to come in and out? The other thing, and probably one of the biggest things to know about recruiting this generation, is that this is a gig generation. 81% of them have an interest in going into the gig economy, being contract workers. This could benefit, for those of you who are doing temporary and seasonal employment, this could really benefit you as people float around. I know my mother's actually a gig event employee. She works for 4 or 5 different event agencies, and they just call her and she decides which events she wants to temporarily staff. And so that's a model that I think this generation is going to really like, and they liked it prior to the pandemic, and they'll probably like it afterwards because it creates a diversity in the kinds of things that they can pick. So a few of those things as we think about recruiting. The other thing about recruiting is we're not just looking at jobs, but we're looking at career fields. I know that when I taught an event planning class at the University of Arizona, it was the only event planning class that was offered, and it was an elective, and it was only for a select 10 students. So how are we actually creating pathways to the profession for people who want to become professional event planners? Are they getting their degrees in travel and tourism, recreation? How are they pipelining in? But are there ways to recruit in a more pipeline kind of a way? So that's for recruitment. I think a lot of this stuff trickles over to retention, is, again, making employees feel valued, making them feel like that what they're doing matters. This is, everybody likes that. But for Gen Z, they want to know that they're making a difference. They also like the opportunity to try new roles and tasks. So having them rotate through and try new things is not only good to keeping them in the profession as a whole, where they might decide to stay and then move up. It's also just good to find out where their strengths and their talents are. There's something called intrapreneurships, which are becoming pretty popular, which is, instead of being an entrepreneur, which this generation has a very, very strong entrepreneurial mentality, it's taking that same spirit of kind of innovation and invention and thinking of things and being able to have some autonomy, hiring someone in an organization and then letting them basically be an internal entrepreneur. And this generation is all over that. So are there special projects that you can hire folks for to say, I want to develop a whole new stream of X, Y, Z. I'm going to hire this person. I'm going to give them 6 months to do it and see how they take off. So these are some things that are really important to them. At the end of the day, with retention, I would say another key piece, and I'll leave you with this, is transparency and authenticity. They want to work for organizations that align with their values, and they want it to be that if the organization messes up, that they just simply say they're sorry and they fix it. They are done with working with, they don't want to work for an organization that, hides problems and isn't transparent. So some of these things really contribute to this idea. Again, going back to authenticity, value, fulfillment is really the key to who they are, recruiting and retaining them.
Listening to you say that, this must be a very difficult time period with the pandemic, with everything that's going on, especially with this need for transparency, authenticity, everything else, because it's awfully hard to find some of that, or to know at least which things truly are being transparent and authentic and things like that. So I can only imagine how some of them are struggling in this day and age. So I think we've kind of set the stage for who Gen Z is. I'm going to check in really quick with Chuck and Allie and see if there's any questions in the chat that have come up that we've missed that are a good kind of about, before we get into like marketing and sales and those things, anything just about Gen Z as a whole. Chuck, take yourself off mute. Take yourself off mute, Chuck. Oh, still on mute.
We have 2 questions in the Q&A section.
Yep, and we're getting to those shortly here. So I'm going to
roll nothing else. There's nothing else in the chat other than what's in here.
All right, perfect. Then we will keep rolling along. Just a reminder, people, if you do have questions for Dr. Seemiller, you can always use the Q&A to do so. So let's switch a little bit now to talk a little bit more about how Gen Z relates to like the meetings and events industry. So talk for a little bit, if you could, about what kind of marketing strategies might work best to get a Gen Zer to come to an event. How do you attract them and gain their interest to, again, whether that's educational or networking or whether it's, how do you get them to be interested in your event?
This generation is all about customization and personalization. They want to feel that they are being invited to an event, not that the event is open for their attendance. And there's a real distinct difference in that. When you look at who this generation trusts, and you were saying it before about where are they getting their information? Who do they even look to see what's real and what's not? They're looking to their parents. They're looking to their friends. So it's funny, if you were to talk to a Gen Zer and find out where they wanted to go eat dinner, for instance, my first instinct would be say, go on Yelp and see what has 5 stars and pick something from there. They say, well, why would I even trust those people? I'm like, well, 5,000 people gave it a 5-star review. Don't you want to go? No. I called my best friend and she said she ate a burger from there and it was terrible. but 5,000 people had really good burgers. It doesn't matter because her friend said not to go. And this is really, I mean, this is a really indicative thing around marketing to understand is this personalization is really important. It's this idea that peers and parents can endorse things by making recommendations. If they say it's a great idea to go and attend or participate, a lot of them will say, okay, yes, that sounds great, especially the ones that are a little bit younger, right? That are in more of their formative years. So those endorsements matter. The other thing too is being able to connect whatever the event is to their values and their skill sets. Why is it important to them and what will they get out of it? And being very clear about that so that instead of it just, just having some kind of blanket message, thinking about, here's what you're going to get out of this. Here's the explicit outcome. And you don't want it to be formed in such a very structured way as outcomes, but thinking about how you weave it into the marketing for them to say, okay, when I'm done going to this, I will have maybe I'll just have had fun, or I'll have met new people, or maybe I'll have learned something, but being very clear about that. They're also very conscious of their time. Their attention span overall has decreased from previous generations. So we're looking at really long events are not working well for them. Asking them to go in and sit in something that's 2 or 3 hours is just tough. So what can you do to break that up? Can you have miniature events that are clustered? Can you have opportunities for experiential pieces in between so that they feel like they're part of that event? But if you're looking at just general marketing, things that we know reach out to them are around social media, short videos, YouTube videos. I'm not sure how well TikTok will do for marketing since that's kind of their space. And there's a theory called the creepy treehouse effect that says when grownups get in the spaces of young people on social media, they tend to go find a new social media outlet. So if we invade TikTok, they may leave there, but they do find that YouTube is sort of a general place to be. So they go on there and watch little videos, little promos. They like memes, GIFs, things that are fun in order to kind of lure them in. But certainly, this idea of kind of short, quick, to the point, what am I going to get out of it? And do my friends and family recommend it?
Follow up to that, because you talk about the creepy treehouse, which I hadn't heard that statement before. That's so spot on. If I were to do a TikTok video, I would expect everyone to leave social media and never come back. But if you get a Gen Zer who can relate to that audience to do some of that work for you, do they relate to that, or does the idea of it being corporate or commercial or something like that, does that also scare them away, or is it just that they want to relate to the content and the individual that's doing it?
It's a little bit of both. So if you have a young person who's making the video and they're being transparent from the heart, kind of talking naturally and authentically about something, yes, it can absolutely resonate with them. If they're reading from a script that some 45-year-old put together, probably not. So it's a little bit of a mix of both. I've seen some really good examples of Gen Zers who have put together short, maybe 1-minute YouTube videos about what they love about their institutions, and they post them on college recruiting, websites, and you can click on and watch them. And it's not scripted; it's really kind of impromptu, and that really resonates with Gen Z. So I would say if you keep the corporate message out and let them have some free reign, then yeah, it could be a great marketing tool.
Okay. And this might be a good time for one of the open Q&As as well, as we're talking marketing. The question was asked, which group is more price sensitive and less price sensitive in purchasing products and services? So again, I think someone was saying in comparison to different generations, who's more price sensitive right now and who's less price sensitive?
Right now, Gen Z is going to be incredibly price sensitive. And the reason is, certainly if you look at the job and the financial outlook of this generation, specifically since the pandemic started, they were the ones, the young adults and even young millennials who lost their jobs, didn't have the income, don't have discretionary income. So for them to, buy an event ticket or go do something for fun, even when it kicks back up, it's going to be tough. It's going to be a tough sell to them to say, okay, you don't really have enough money to even pay your rent. Now come and pay for this event. Millennials were kind of known for not buying things anymore and starting to buy experiences, which was probably played out quite well for restaurants, certainly Starbucks, the event industry, where they would rather go to a concert than they would to save up and buy a new area rug for their living room, kind of thing. And that's probably just part and parcel of being young too, but it was a real shift. And so here's Gen Z who's now saying, yeah, now I'm not going to spend money on things or experiences because I don't have it. B, I'm really worried about money. So it'll be interesting to see how everything comes back potentially post-pandemic, but even before that, they were really, really holding on to what we call money for a rainy day. And they're probably happy that many of them held on to those piggy banks for days like today. But I'm not seeing them running out right away and spending a ton of money. As a matter of fact, what's really interesting is if you look deep into the spring break excursion experiences where there were all these pictures of Gen Zers at spring break partying, and I don't care about the coronavirus thing. It was interesting. There was a number of really great stories that kind of went underneath that, and found that a lot of the students had saved up for years and spent their whole life savings on a spring break trip, couldn't get their money back, and now felt they were being financially responsible by seeing the experience through. So not that they were being irresponsible health-wise. So that comes from a place of really being worried about how they're spending their money and thinking, oh, this is my biggest purchase I've ever made, and now I'm not going to execute it.
See, and that's really valuable too, to think through the different perspectives that we should all have and why it's important to understand these generational shifts. Because the media and the way a lot of that portrayed obviously didn't take those things into account, and to really think through all the time, where that individual might have been coming from. Again, not that these things apply blanketly to everyone in a group,
right.
But very much there's different ways to think about it. So thanks for sharing that.
Mm-hmm.
Let's talk a little bit, because it's a very hot topic right now, obviously amongst our members and planners and everyone else out there. How does Generation Z perceive online and virtual events? And even when social distancing is lifted, are they still going to be interested in attending more virtual events than real in-person events?
Mm-hmm. Well, this was a generation that was probably more open to attending virtual events to begin with, simply given that many of them were relatively tech savvy and weren't kind of taken aback by something like Zoom. I know even with, I told my mom, who's a baby boomer, an older baby boomer, and I said, let's Zoom. And she just kind of got this look on her face and kind of freaked out. And I had to spend a week with her teaching her how to click 2 buttons to get on Zoom. But now that she's on it, she does it all the time. And this is something really interesting to consider, is that now that people in general, and certainly Gen Zers, who many of them are young and are taking school through Zoom and through all sorts of web-based platforms, those who weren't comfortable with those platforms are more comfortable than ever before. So that technological anxiety that may have existed for some of them, it still could exist, but I think it's probably lessened given the fact that just much of life is now online. And people say, oh, look, not only do I know the right buttons to click, but I also know the capacity of things to happen online. I've been tuning into our local improv group every Saturday night, and they've been doing improv through Zoom, something that I never thought could be done through Zoom. And so now we're seeing events taking a whole different turn, where they're not just simply webinars or nothing, and I mean, I know there was diversity within it before, but now people are having to be incredibly creative about how they use Zoom. And I think young people are saying, hey, this is a place where I can go online to see how different events are playing out, and are really open to being able to do that. So that's something that I think, will help with this generation. They like the flexibility of being able to log on or not log on. It's less of a commitment than having to drive somewhere, or even an event where you have to fly somewhere, deal with parking, all that kind of stuff. It saves that hassle and that anxiety. And that's also really a nice feature about doing virtual events. They like self-learning and self-direction, and they like to be able to do kinds of things on the side. So if somebody's talking and they say something that's of interest, they could be Googling it on the side, or doing something where they can feel like they're creating their own sense of engagement, where they might not necessarily be able to do that in a large event, unless of course they're with their phones underneath a table at a banquet. But those kinds of things also really play into how Gen Z likes to be engaged and how they like to learn. And they also like it like synchronous. This is the other thing that's really important to know, is that while many of them are doing well online, they like the synchronous connection. Remember, we go back to that relationship piece. So having pre-recorded events that people can just watch isn't necessarily something that is aligning with how they feel like they want to connect. They want to know that even if they don't ask a question to a presenter, they want to know that they have the ability to, or at least that presenter is talking to them specifically. So that personal and that customizable connection is important. And they like the authenticity. This whole kind of, the last, month or so, where we have seen, if anybody watched the Elton John special, where he was, had musicians basically playing songs from their living rooms. This sense of authenticity and connection and making people real really is appealing to Gen Z. I mean, it goes right along the lines with them. They can see people really close up and feel like, hey, I think it was Tim McGraw. I'm by his pool with Tim McGraw, and he's playing for me. I don't have to be at a concert where I can't even see him. I am right here with Tim and he is live with me. So there is, again, that sense of connection that I think that really this generation craves, and virtual events done really well can certainly achieve that. And so I think you're going to see a lot of folks going to them. But with that said, I think that's really interesting to think about is there was a study that was just released last week and asked Gen Zers, how likely are you going to go back out in crowds when the pandemic goes, kind of passes? And a vast majority said, I'm not ready. And maybe they will be in a few weeks or a few months. They said, I'm not ready. I'll go hang out with 10 or fewer friends, but I don't see myself going to a big concert, a big event anytime soon. I'm a little reluctant. And so as we think about especially the industries that put on things like concerts and things for younger people, that, what does that mean when we have a 50,000 person arena, with Taylor Swift? Who's going to that concert? I know there will be a ton of Gen Zers who go, but there will probably be a ton that stay home.
Yeah, no, it's definitely something that's very present on the mind of all of our venues and planners, trying to sort through. We've been having a lot of conversations recently about how you implement social distancing guidelines in these settings. And, you're not going to have 50,000 people in an arena. That's the reality. You're going to be lucky to get 12 in there, spaced apart. And then no one's going to be able to sell concessions because everyone's going to be wearing masks, and they all have to queue up but 6 feet apart. So you can't all show up 10 minutes before the event starts and get in, because it may take an hour to get through in that line. I mean, there's a lot of things I think that are going on, and it's, I guess I would say it's a little bit encouraging to know that the younger generation, the Gen Zers as well, are just as concerned about these things as the rest of us and want to do it safely and in a way that doesn't create bigger problems than we're already facing out there. So that's great feedback. One other quick aside, I know I've loved virtual happy hours, because as an introvert, I love the fact that happy hour has a time limit, right? It's a 55-minute Zoom meeting, and then when it's done, like, you don't have to make up an excuse to leave. You're like, oh, time's up. See you next week on happy hour. So there's a little Gen Z in some of us introverts as well too, I think.
Well, and to add to that, I think it's funny because this social distancing is really appealing to a lot of introverts. And think about young people as introverts who may otherwise not ever have gone to an event, may now be choosing to do virtual events by virtue of the fact that they don't have to go anywhere. So you have a whole new segment of the population that may actually choose to go to events if they didn't have to necessarily show up in a big crowd.
Right. Yeah. All right. Let's switch gears just a little bit and talk a little bit about how the pandemic impacts the way that Gen Z might participate in events in the future, or even considers this industry as a career path. I mean, what kind of impact is this really going to have, in your opinion, just both as a individual and as a Gen Z expert, on the future of the events industry for careers and for attendance at events from this generation?
Yeah, I mean, that's such a great thing to ponder, because, we're being still in the midst of all of this. We're seeing how the pandemic is impacting particular industries harder than it is others. And I think the event industry is one of the most impacted. Certainly, travel, we hear about, airlines and all sorts of other industries that are being incredibly impacted. And then you hear of others that are flourishing, right? I mean, who wouldn't have wanted to buy Zoom stock in about, January? Yep. But so for a generation that's really interested in kind of gig work, contract work, picking up jobs, the seasonal and temporary employment opportunities that the event industry provides is really attractive, especially to a generation who, some of them are out of work when they weren't planning on being out of work. They might be willing to jump in. The question is, though, will there be any events for them to staff? And if so, I mean, that's really limited staffing, or it's staffed in a different way. But the bigger picture is around and I think more around the jobs and the careers, is trying to figure out, how does the event planning industry become relatively recession proof? And this is something that I think a lot of industries are having to ask themselves. How do you figure out a way to be able to deliver what you need to deliver, even in the case of all sorts of different types of emergencies? I know, for instance, higher education is going through that right now. And if this were 20 years ago, the opportunity for online education would not have really been an option. But now we have online education, so it was a matter of getting faculty to switch over and teach online. And while there's lots of bugs and things to work out, there was at least a way of doing that. But the other elements of collegiate life, like residence halls and athletics and other areas, it's like, I don't know what we're going to do. We're going to have to think this through in a different way. And I think a lot of industries are having these heart-to-heart talks with themselves, not simply for survival of the industry, but thinking about who's being recruited into it. Our young people want to go into recession-proof jobs, and they're starting out right now, making a career choice that could last for 40, 50 years for them. Do they want to enter an industry that they think might not be able to sustain a storm? Do they want to go into something where, you know, they could work, you know, individually or at a distance? This is the only reference point that they have in their young careers at this point, is saying who's surviving and who's not. So the probably, you know, we all know the event industry is going to survive, but how is that messaging going to go out to young people to say, yes, here are all the really innovative things that we're doing in the event industry to make sure that we can weather this storm. Please be a part of our, you know, our community. Come and enter into our career fields, because yes, this isn't anything that's going away. These are all the great things that we're doing to make sure that it sustains, you know, the test of time. So again, a lot of it's in the messaging, and this generation just wants to know that they're going to be aligned with however the organizations are operating. And in this case, even as large as an industry, what those choices that the industry makes, how is that generation going to feel connected and feel inspired and feel valued in that process to choose that as an industry to go into?
Yeah, no, it's, I think it's a challenging time for them to think about any industry right now. So your advice to think about, again, for this industry, or really, and how do you make it recession proof, or how do you make it to survive the next crisis, whatever it is that comes our way, so that you don't have to scale back as dramatically, or that you're able to support people through it with opportunities. So we've got a question that came in that I think is really relevant right now, and we've got just a few minutes left, so I'm going to launch the final poll here in just a second for the session evaluation. So if people have to drop off at time, they can do so, but we'll stick around for a couple more questions with Corey and do that. Someone asked, given that many of this generation are college bound or in college, with the current uncertainty around going back to college or not, depending on the school, do you see any current trends? In other words, more students interested in gap years or not wanting to pay for online classes at the start, or maybe just entering the workforce? I mean, what are you seeing with, you know, Gen Z students about all of this and their plans for college right now?
Yeah, well, you know, interestingly, before this whole pandemic started, we were starting to see a dip in enrollment of college-age students choosing to go to college. They were being, in many cases, priced out of even their state institutions. And so some of them were saying, I'm just not going at all. So this has been kind of a trend that we've actually been seeing building. And it's concurrently happening at the same time that there are many businesses that are aligning with institutions to offer free tuition if you work there. For instance, Starbucks partners with Arizona State University. You work 20 more hours a week at Starbucks, you get a free college education. So why in the world would anybody take out $50,000 to $100,000 of student debt to go to school when you could go work for Starbucks for a year and then get your education paid for? And more of these are popping up, more of these tuition remission programs. So there's two things that are happening in the mind of Gen Z. One is, I don't know if I even need a college degree compared to what I'd be spending on it. And two is, I could always get one later if I work for somebody who will pay for it. So this was already what we were coming into. Right now, what we have is, you know, we've been selling potential college students on this idea that what you're paying for is not your college degree specifically, and that alone, you're paying for the college experience. And right now, what's happening with the pandemic is we've stripped it down, and there really is just ending up being credits earned, and it's not the college experience. So you're taking out all this debt to not get to live in the residence halls, to not get to go to a sports game, not to be in student organizations the same way that you were. So some of these students might just say, you know what, I'm going to wait, because if I'm going to take out this kind of loan, I want the college experience. I don't necessarily just want the college degree. So we'll have to kind of track it and see, but I think that that's probably something that we can safely say would result, given that what we knew about them even before the pandemic.
Yeah. And it's interesting too that you talk about the college experience, because I think there was an Today feature this morning, Today Show feature this morning, talking about a couple students here. Well, there's 12 or 13 lawsuits right now with students suing for some of their tuition money to come back. And part of that, the argument for that is that, yes, it's more than just the schools are saying, but we're still giving you an education. They're saying, but we're paying for more than that. Yep. And that typically an full online education is a reduced rate. It's a lower cost because you're paying to have fraternities and sororities and dorms and athletic facilities and a student union and clubs and orgs and all of the different things that go with, you know, landing on campus. And while I, as a former higher ed professional myself for 25 years, I tend to agree that, you know, brick and mortar is not going to go away, because kids will always want to go to college and have that experience, and parents will always want their kids to go to college and have that experience if it's possible. But it may look very different, and maybe not all higher ed is going to survive out there. We got one last question that was in earlier that I
Can
think
I
is.
say something, Joel,
Go ahead,
real
Chuck.
quick
Yeah,
before,
go for it.
before you move on to that? There is an opportunity that I know we're talking about the whole Gen Z thing, but there is an opportunity if less students attend your campuses, if your university is willing to consolidate housing, to open some of that housing up for year-round meeting and conferences, even if it's on a temporary basis till things rebound. Give you a perfect example. We actually put together a plan for the University of Nevada, Las Vegas years ago, where they took one of their low occupancy residence halls. They did a consolidation plan, and we put together a sales plan for them for the year to sell several floors of that building. So there's a way to kind of take a new look at what you do with those spaces during the year if you go through a temporary phase of less students going. And one of the questions that popped up here, Joel, about that in the chat that came up is, after all this discussion about not money, maybe once there's a vaccination, do you think, Dr. Seemiller, that the pandemic will forever change Gen Z's desire to gather in groups, or do you think once things get back to normal, they're going to get back to normal with their behaviors, gathering behaviors?
Yeah, that's a great question. For many of us who are older, we see this pandemic as a once in a lifetime experience. And so when there's a vaccine, we might just go back to the way that we were behaving before. Some of us, just simply because we don't think it can happen again. When you're young and you were born around 9/11, you lived through a recession, and then you've had a pandemic by the time you graduate high school, you might think that this is just the way things are. You might be a little bit more shielded and guided in how you do things. So the impact might be a little bit stronger. There's some great studies out on the impact of millennials during 9/11 and how long those psychological and sociological effects took place. And for many of them, it's all the way into adulthood. So it wouldn't be surprising to see this type of what we call traumatic event actually having an impact even longer than this. You may find that just like the GI generation was still hoarding things when they were 80 years old, because they lived through the Depression, because that's just what you learn and you experience when you're in your adolescence and young adulthood, tends to stick with you. Does it mean they're never going to go to a crowded event again? Probably not. But does it mean that they're going to think twice about shaking someone's hand or things that aren't really all that necessary? Yeah, probably, at least for a while here.
Yeah. All right, let's end on a fun one just to wrap up here. It's a quick, easy one, I think. What are the best giveaways or free stuff to hand out to Gen Z attendees? Like what's their swag of choice? What kinds of things do they like to get when they show up at a meeting or event? You got any insights on that?
Oh goodness, that's a really good one. They like things that are really special and unique. Maybe if you just grabbed something like from, a t-shirt that anybody can get and you're just giving them away, and the t-shirt's normally only $5, that's not as exciting as getting a t-shirt that was only made for the giveaway and you could only get it. It was special and unique to your experience. That is probably the underlying piece of everything that situates them and makes them different and wanting something. So it's not just getting something for free, it's getting something that nobody else got for free.
That's very cool. Yeah, I remember actually a shirt that they did for the freshman convocation at the University of Arizona a few years ago with the icons for bear down. So it was just the bear icon and the down arrow. And those things were so hot and everybody wanted one and only the freshmen got them. And they weren't selling them in the bookstore or anything like that. And it really did. It created a huge buzz around just people saying, look, I got something that no one else has in their possession. And so that does resonate, I think, quite a bit with what I remember seeing a few years ago. So, all right, well, I want to thank you, Corey, for spending time with us this afternoon. This has been really great. Again, I've known how wonderful you are for a long time. I'm glad that I could introduce you to some others out there. We did record the session. It'll be available on uniquevenues.com/resources within 24 hours. I will also follow up with all the attendees with some information about Corey. She does do keynotes and presentations and other kinds of topics of interest for various organizations and groups out there. She's got her books out there. If you're really interested in this subject or you'd like to dig a little bit deeper or take advantage of her incredible wealth of knowledge, I'm sure she'd be interested in doing that. So I will make sure to send all that stuff out again within the next couple of days to everyone as well. So Corey, thank you for joining us today. I'm going to throw up the slide really quick just for everyone. Quick reminder as you're dropping off to go ahead and fill out that session evaluation if you haven't done so yet. And just as a reminder for everyone, we do have more webinars that are coming up. If I can get my PowerPoint to advance here. There we go. Tomorrow we have a industry expert panel going on. And right now we're over 600 registrations on that. Now we expect some attrition like we see with all our webinars, but only the first 500 people get in. So if you are signed up for that tomorrow, make sure you get on a little early so that you can get into the room, because at 500, our Zoom account will stop allowing people into the room. Again, I think we're gonna be fine, but just an encouragement to get there early. We've got our last Unique Series 1 coming up on May 13th, where we'll talk about leadership strategies with Dr. Michael Brown, who did our wellness workshops for us last month. And a couple more in our next level series, marketing strategies, designing a brand guide, and digital advertising, understanding what it is, why it works, and how you execute it, along with our continued things for member group therapy and our planners. So again, thank you everyone for being here today. Chuck?
Yep, I just again want to say thank you to Dr. Seemiller. There's one more thing I want to add because it's kind of a fun thing. So many of you are multitasking or hypertasking between being an employee, a parent, and a teacher. And Joel, I'm not sure if it's on the resources page yet, or if it'll be there later today or tomorrow. But Unique Venues, our marketing team has put together an 11 or 12 page activity book for you to, and if you'll bear with me, I'll share my screen just to kind of get a sense for what it looks like. But we have put together an activity book for, oops, I can't share.
Oh,
so
sorry, wait, I can do that really quickly, hang on.
And so you can go ahead and use this with age appropriate children. You know, it's unfortunately more for, you know, younger elementary school children. But you can see we've got this whole great activity book, page after page, that we put together. So if you want to give little activities to your kids while you're trying to get some work done, this is something we put together for you. And we ask that you share this with whoever wants it. So if you know people in the neighborhood who wants it, it's free. We'll try to update them from time to time, but you've got yourself a little bit of an activity book that I like this one. Joel's going to fill this out. If you can have one superpower, what would it be? And then draw yourself as a picture as a superhero.
I draw a
Joel
mean stick
promises
figure.
he's going to do it.
My stick figures are incredible.
I can't wait. So, but just a little something fun. So that's on the Unique Venues resources page for you to go visit and see. So
great. And Corey, I'll send you one for Casey to fill out so that you got that.
That would be great. I was going to ask you, she, you know, just so you know, my Gen Z daughter is actually very interested in being an event planner when she grows up.
There you go. People can start recruiting her now. Corey
Exactly.
she takes all offers, signing bonuses, all that kind of stuff. So
exactly.
All right. Well, again, thank you very much to everyone that attended today. We really appreciate you being a part of this. Thank you, Corey, for your incredible insight and wisdom today. And we will see you all on a future Unique Venues webinar. Again, have a great rest of your afternoon.
Bye, everyone.
Bye-bye, everyone.